Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the ADC Candidate Forum. My name is Trini Jacial, and I am very pleased to be your host today for the third year in a row. So today we are going to have three amazing and super interesting presentations that I'm sure you will enjoy because, as you know, this forum was created for you and inspired by you regarding topics that were suggested and requested by ADC candidates. So welcome. I'm gonna, of course, give you time, give you a few minutes before we start to make sure that no one misses out on any content on this webinar. We'll give you time to join the session, sort out any technical issues. They're not rare, so relax, you'll have some time and get comfortable and ready. Once again, I want to say thank you for being part of this wherever you are. We are very happy to see that so many people will be joining us today from all over the world. And I would like to officially start this ADC Candidate Forum 2025. So I would like to acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar from the lens of the Kimui, Wulabara, Yidinji, and Yirkanji peoples. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are located today, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. So once again, my name is Trini Jacial, and I will be your host today in the ADC Candidate Forum. I guess a little bit about myself. You can call me Trini, everyone calls me Trini, and I am a successful candidate of the ADC assessment process. So I know exactly what most of you are going through today. I completed a Bachelor of Dental Surgery in 2011 and gained experience in both private and public sectors and specialized in prosthodontics in Chile. In 2016, I decided to go and travel, and finally I decided to migrate to Australia in 2017. And I am currently based in Cairns, beautiful Cairns, with my family, where I practice as a dentist, and I am a member of the ADC Assessment Committee and chair of the Candidate Reference Group. So I am here, of course, to host this, but it is an honor to represent you all as the next candidate and part of the Candidate Reference Group. I am extremely pleased to be a part of this wonderful event where we're going to be hearing and learning about many important topics that were suggested by yourselves, candidates. So I am going to remind you that if there is anything that you would be interested to hear about, please let us know to keep it in mind for any future editions of this ADC Candidate Forum. I will also remind all the participants that this webinar is being recorded. So if you missed on something, if you need to go to the toilet, take a little break, please do. You will have the recording of this. And as I said before, today we're going to have three presentations. They are going to be divided in two sessions, and at the end of each session, there will be time for some questions in a little panel discussion. So as we go, please send us your questions if you have any to the chat or through the Q&A. And the most popular ones or the most pertinent ones will be addressed then. But if we run short on time, we will do our best to provide the answers after the webinar when we post the recording. So let's get more into this. Today, we're going to be hearing about Australian visas for the ADC candidates. So we will be having Natalie Walsh giving us an insight and advice on how to obtain the correct visa for your ADC examination. There we have Natalie. Hello. We will have Dr. Alex Dancyger sharing with us her expertise about family, sexual, and domestic violence, particularly on how to recognize, respond, and refer when providing care to victim survivors. So everyone, welcome Natalie, welcome Dr. Alex. How are you? And last but not least, we will be having Dr. Martin Webb telling us about how to use item numbers appropriately when treating and billing patients in an Australian context. I believe Dr. Martin is super busy at the moment, but he will be joining us when his turn comes. So I think we should be about to start. Once again, I want to thank you all for being here with us, for giving us a little bit of your time. We know you are joining us from all over the world, probably in Australia. Some of you are finishing your working day, or some of you are on the other side of the world, just waking up in the middle of the night, just, I don't know, joining us from your computers. So thank you for your time, for your effort, for your support. So now I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Natalie Walsh. Natalie, are you there?
I am. Hi, Trini. Thank you.
How are you? Thank you so much for being with us today. So as a little introduction, Natalie is a business industry and regional outreach officer for the health sector with the Department of Home Affairs. The Biro network supports business, employers, industry bodies, regional communities, and other organizations in understanding skilled visa pathway options to assist with labor shortages when suitably qualified Australian workers are not available. So Natalie, I'm pretty sure many people are just waiting for your presentation. So the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Trini. I will just share my screen. I will be talking through a PowerPoint presentation, so just give me a moment for that. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us today. As Trini introduced me, I'm Natalie Walsh, and I'm a business industry and regional outreach officer, also known as a Biro for the health sector at the Department of Home Affairs. And I'm joined by my colleague, Maylene Arsan, who is also a Biro for the health sector and online with us today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. So some of you may be aware that the Department of Home Affairs visa programs are going through some significant reforms and changes, which may affect visa options and pathways. This means that the information I cover today may be subject to change. It is current at the moment though, so I recommend that you keep an eye on the Home Affairs website for updates and changes as new information becomes available. So the topics that I'm going to cover today are the Electronic Travel Authority subclass 601 visa, the e-visitor subclass 561 visa, the visitor visa, which is subclass 600. I'm going to touch on some employer-sponsored visas, which are for potentially once you have qualified and registered here in Australia, and some general skill migration visas. Then I will cover a little on the Check Twice, Submit Once, which is a campaign which provides some very useful tips around submitting complete applications. The Visa Entitlement Verification online tool, which is also known as VIVO, and then just a little look at some useful tips, links, sorry. So first we'll look at the Electronic Travel Authority, which is subclass 601 visa, commonly known as an ETA. So an ETA allows you to travel to Australia as a tourist, to visit family or friends, as a business visitor, to make general business or employment inquiries, take part in a conference or something similar, and to study and train for up to 3 months. And that would include to sit an exam such as the ADC dental examination. To be eligible for this visa, it isn't open to, unfortunately, to all countries. So you must have a passport from an eligible country. I won't read them out now because it is an extensive list, but the full list of countries is available on the Home Affairs website. It's really important that you understand that this visa is a temporary visa, and for this visa to be approved, the department must be satisfied that it is only being used for its intended purpose of a temporary stay in Australia. And as a general requirement, like all other visas, you must obey any conditions and stay periods attached to the visa and meet health and character requirements. You might need to have a health examination to prove you meet the health requirement, but not everybody does. And you might need to have additional health examinations if you come from a country where there are public health concerns such as polio or Ebola virus. The ETA, as I said, is a temporary visa. It usually has multiple entry, and it's valid to travel to Australia for either 12 months or for as long as your passport is valid, whichever is shorter. You can remain in Australia for up to 3 months each time you enter Australia, and you can leave and re-enter as many times as you wish while the ETA is valid. You can't include family members in your application. If you want family members to come out, they will also need to apply for their own ETA, and that includes anyone possibly listed on someone's passport. So separate applications would be needed. You can only apply for an ETA using the Australian ETA app, which can be downloaded for free from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. The cost to apply is currently, there is a $20 service fee, which isn't actually, it's a service fee for the ETA app. It isn't actually a visa application fee. And it's really important that you note that you must be outside of Australia when you apply for the ETA and for when we decide the application. So we'll now look at the e-visitor subclass 651 visa. An e-visitor visa allows you to travel to Australia very similar as a tourist, to visit family or friends, as a business visitor. It also has that study or train for up to 3 months component on there. So it is quite similar. You have to have a passport from an eligible country. So the eligible countries for the e-visitor 651 visa are different to the ETA. So those countries are again available on the Home Affairs website. You must be a genuine visitor and only intend to stay temporarily and meet the conditions of stay attached to your visa. So every visa, there is an option to attach visa conditions on there, and one of the conditions that would be on any of these visas would be, for example, that there is no work permitted while you're on one of these visitor visas, but there may be other conditions, and it's really important that you're aware of them, but we'll cover that later, and meet health and character requirements. And again, you may be asked to do a health examination. So there'll be some questions that you're asked as you're applying for the visa, and if it is determined through your responses that you need to do a health check, it'll be identified in the application. So this visa allows you to visit Australia as often as you wish within the 12-month period and stay up to 3 months each time you enter. And again, family members can't be added to your visa application, but they can apply separately in their own right. So to apply for this visa, you must be outside of Australia when you apply and when we make the decision on the application. There is no charge, no service fee or visa application charge for this visa. And the application needs to be made by an IMI account. So you need to create an IMI account from the Home Affairs website. There is a link on the top right-hand corner of the website, and you can create an account for yourself there, and you would use that IMI account to make an application for an e-visitor visa and any future applications you may want to make. So we will now look at the visitor visa, which is subclass 600. This visa allows, again, similarly, it's a tourist visa to visit family, study or train for up to 3 months. You must have access to and enough money to support yourself while you're in Australia, which is really important. That this is something that there's extra requirements for this visa. When you're applying, you may be asked to sort of provide further evidence. And so the same general requirements, so that you're a genuine visitor just coming temporarily to comply with your visa and stay for the period in which it's approved and to meet health and character requirements. You might have to do a health examination to prove you meet the health requirement. And you might need to do additional health exams if you come from a country where there is public concern, such as I said earlier, polio or Ebola virus. There's further information on the Home Affairs website regarding the health examination, so you can have a look at it, and it will guide you towards whether you need to do some additional checks or not. So with this visa, you can stay for the period or dates specified on the visa grant. So it isn't like 12 months with 3 months stay like the other ones. So we determine the length of the visa on a case-by-case basis. Things we might consider when determining your stay period include how long you want to stay, so how long you request to stay, and why you want to stay in Australia, so your purpose of your visit and what you intend to do while you're here. We might not grant the length of stay you want. We might adjust it. As a general rule, we usually grant this visa for up to 3 months. But if you have compelling reasons or strong reasons to want to stay for a longer period, we do absolutely grant for longer periods as well. Again, the same thing applies. You can't include your family members on your application. Each family member needs to submit their own application. So you need to apply for this visa outside of Australia. Sorry. When you apply for the visitor visa and for when we decide, this visa does come with an application charge, and it is currently $200. And that payment is made through your IMI account as part of the process of applying for the visa. Now, each of the visas that I've just discussed all have a step-by-step guide on the Home Affairs website. If you search under the visa and then go into the details of the visa, it will have a tab. That one will be an overview, one will be eligibility requirements. There is a step-by-step tab, and it is a very useful tool which tells you what type of documents you may need to provide with an application. A key part of meeting the visa requirements for all 3 visitor visas is that you are a genuine temporary entrant. So you must meet that requirement. This means that the visa decision makers must be satisfied that you're travelling to Australia to visit and intend to leave before the visa expires. So it's recommended, particularly for the 600 visa, where they look at more documentation to provide as much proof as you can to show you're visiting Australia as a temporary visitor only. As a guide, this could include a letter from an employer stating that you plan to return to your job, proof that you have immediate family members in your home country, proof, if applicable, that you own a house or a major asset in your home country. Also provide evidence of your ADC exam or potential exam date, and evidence that you have access to funds to financially support yourself while you're in Australia. So they're all really important. Now, all these visas are temporary, as I said, and they don't allow work in Australia. If you want to come to Australia to work, you must apply for a visa with work rights. So I'll now briefly cover some visas that are available to dentists to work in Australia once you pass your ADC exam and get your APRA registration, of course, if that's your intended, options and path. So we will look at some employer-sponsored visas. So this slide shows 3 employer-sponsored visa options that are used by dentists to work in Australia, as well as many other occupations. So I'll just cover the key features. There is a Skills in Demand visa, also known as the SID, which is subclass 482. For this visa, you must be nominated by an Australian business that is an approved standard business sponsor. You can live and work and study anywhere in Australia while you have this visa. As I said, it is a temporary visa, but it can be granted for up to 4 years. There's a clear pathway to permanent residency from this visa. And currently there are 2 streams available, the core skills and the specialist skills streams. So if applying under the core skills stream, the occupation that you're applying under must be on the core skills occupation list, which includes dentists and dental specialists. The individual must earn a minimum salary in line with the core skills income threshold and the Australian market salary rate. So that's really important for employers, so they understand that they must pay you, and it's the same amount that they would pay an Australian worker doing the same job in the same area. You need to have 1 year work experience, a relevant work experience, noting that if licensing or registration or skills assessment process may require a different level of work to perform the relevant occupation in Australia, but for the purposes of the visa alone, 1 year work experience is required. The next visa that I'll cover is a skilled employer-sponsored regional provisional subclass 494 visa. So again, you must be nominated by an Australian business that's an approved standard business sponsor, but the difference here is that they must be operating in regional Australia. This visa is to support the regional areas and employers and communities of Australia. So you must live, work and study, if you choose to, in a designated regional area of Australia. So for visa purposes, that is all of Australia except for Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane metropolitan areas. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that there's ongoing reviews and changes to the migration system, and one of the areas that is currently under review is the designated regional area settings. So please keep an eye on that. So it's a temporary visa for up to 5 years. As you'll see, the title of this visa has the word provisional in it, and that is because there is an inbuilt provision that if you have complied with your visa after 3 years, you can apply for permanent residency. You do not require any further sponsorship from an employer. It is an application that you make yourself because you've met those requirements for permanent residency. That visa that you'd be applying for in this circumstance is a 191 visa, but it's only open to people who have lived in regional areas for a minimum of 3 years. Your qualification experience must be on the regional skilled occupation list. You must undertake mandatory skills assessment. You must meet all requirements, including English, the 3 years work experience that is required for this visa, which is different to the previous visa, which is only 1 year, and health and character checks. Now, I'll just have a quick look at the employer nomination scheme, the ENS subclass 186 visa. This is a permanent residency visa. So you can actually come straight from, say, your home country if you have an employer that is willing to sponsor you for permanent residency and you meet the requirements. So you need to be nominated by an Australian employer. You can live, work and study anywhere in Australia. The qualification experience must be on the relevant skilled occupation list, and you must undertake a mandatory skills assessment and meet the requirements, including the English language requirements, 3 years work experience and health and character checks. So I will just move on. Oh, I've gone too far. There we go. To the General Skill Migration Program. So these are just a couple of visas that don't require employer sponsorship. They are more independent visas that you apply for yourself, but do require a nomination from a state or territory government. They're points-tested visa that allow a visa holder access to permanent residence without being linked to an employer. So that is the skilled nominated subclass 190 visa and the skilled work regional provisional subclass 491 visa. Now the 491 visa is a temporary visa, but like the previous 494 visa, 3 years after meeting the conditions of that visa, you can apply for permanent residence without requiring any nomination from an employer or a state or further nomination from a state or territory government. You just need to have complied with that visa. So just briefly some eligibility on this, these two visas. So nominating a skilled occupation in the relevant skilled occupation list, have a suitable skills assessment for the nominated occupation, meet the minimum points test score of 65, have competent English, submit an expression of interest on Skill Select, which is a portal on the Home Affairs website, be invited by a state or territory government to apply, and be under 45 years of age at time of nomination. So they're all part of the requirements for these visas. So there's no cost to submit an expression of interest on the Skill Select portal, and either no or low cost to submit a registration of interest. So after you submit your expression of interest, if there is a particular state or territories that you are happy to come and live in, you need to register your interest with those states and territories, because otherwise there is this huge list of candidates, and the states and territory governments do not know where someone is would like to live. And obviously it's a very large country and it's very diverse. So you need to go in to that state government agency and register your interest there. There is a website called Smart Move Australia, and I can circulate a link to this. I will put together some links of some of the things that I've covered, and I will send them to the Australian Dental Council, who will provide those to you in the coming days after the session. So that Smart Move Australia website does have links to all the different state and territory government agencies that are responsible for this program, and that's where you would register your interests, so that that state or territory knows that you're happy and willing to go and migrate to their state or territory and fill one of their skill shortages. So the key message I can give you is to make sure you refer to the Home Affairs website and be familiar with the possible visa pathway for your circumstances, and stay up to date with any changes, because there will be some changes coming through. There's been many reforms already, but there will be some future changes. So the Department of Home Affairs has been running a Check Twice, Submit Once campaign to assist with better quality applications, to assist with faster processing. So there's a QR code up on the screen at the moment. I will also send the link, as I said earlier, but that link takes you to the Check Twice, Submit Once page at the Home Affairs website, where there are some very useful tips for submitting what we call decision-ready applications. Because the best thing for the department and for you is that when the department looks at a decision maker looks at an application, they can see that you meet all the requirements and we can finalise that application, because we have many of them and we like to get through them as quickly as possible. So when preparing your application for a visa to Australia, remember to provide all the required information and documents. So use a step-by-step guide and use this Check Twice, Submit Once page to help you along the way. Allow plenty of time to collect the necessary documents and information. Double check you've included everything and all information is correct before you submit your application. Make sure your name is spelt as it appears on your passport, including your middle name, and that it's not auto-corrected on your device. Check you have entered your date of birth in the way that in Australia we have our dates of birth, which is the date of the month, then the month, and then the year. So make sure the format is correct and submit your application well ahead of when you want to travel. Now, you may have heard of Visa Entitlement Verification Online, which is also called VIVO, because we always have a short name for everything. So My VIVO provides a fast and convenient way for visa holders to check their Australian visa details. This includes expiry date, work and study rights, and travel conditions. So you can download the My VIVO app free from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. You can also provide this information to potential employers so they are aware of your visa and associated conditions, or you can give them consent to do a check themselves. So when planning your pathway while you're in Australia, it's extremely important to ensure that you apply for your next visa while still holding a valid visa. If you become unlawful, which means that you don't hold a current visa, your options and pathways may become very limited. Now, for anyone who doesn't want to use the My VIVO app, you can sign up online on the Home Affairs website. In that rectangle box towards the top right-hand side, there is a link to VIVO, and you can just sign up there and be able to check those same things. Now, the Home Affairs website has lots of information. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming, without a doubt. You can navigate the website to this page by typing into the search function "Working in Australia" and then navigating to the relevant page depending on the visa pathway in which suits, your personal needs. So it's just a condensed page with some tiles there. It's all around working in Australia that you might find useful. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope you found it useful. On the screen are some links to the Home Affairs website covering some of the topics we discussed. I will put all these together along with some extras that will be circulated to you. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation now. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to you, Trini.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I am pretty sure many of the candidates must have already sore wrists for taking so many notes during your presentation. That was a fantastic and super informative presentation, and I am certain that the practical applications of this will make many people's life easier when planning everything around the ADC examination. As you know, we go through a very, very stressful time, and trying to get a proper visa to come for a few days to take the exam, it just puts so much pressure on candidates. So That was really good. Thank you so much for that. And
Thanks, Trini.
what was I gonna say? Oh, as you know, we have one more presentation, and at the end of this session, I'm gonna bring you back in to answer some questions that the candidates have been sending to us to our chat. Thank you once
Thanks,
again,
Trini.
And now let's welcome our next presenter, Dr. Alex Dancyger.
Hello.
Joining us today. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. So I am going to introduce Alex. She is a senior lecturer in dentistry at JC James Cook University and practicing dentist in Cairns. With a background in dentistry, biomedical sciences, and education, she combines clinical practice with teaching and reconnect oral health to broader health and social issues. Her current focus is on strengthening the role of dental professionals in recognizing and responding to domestic violence, supported by the Keeping Women Safe from Violence Grant 2023. Alex has delivered national presentations with organizations including Our Watch and the Royal Australasian College of Dental Surgeons. And she contributes to professional development with the Australian Dental Association. Through these initiatives, she's advancing awareness, training, and interdisciplinary collaboration to better equip oral health professionals to support patient safety and well-being. So Dr. Alex will be sharing her expertise in family, sexual, and domestic violence with a focus on how to recognize, respond, and refer when providing care to victim survivors. So Alex, the screen is all yours.
I'm just gonna share. Give me 1 second. There we go. Oh, okay. Great. Hi. Sorry. I'm Alex. Yeah, I'm a senior lecturer at JCU, and yeah, I teach across our clinical dentistry program, helping students build their practical skills and really understand what patient-centered care looks like in practice. And so my research focuses on where dentistry kind of intersects with social work and our responses to domestic and sexual violence. And so part of that work is training our dental students to recognize and respond when they see the signs of abuse. And it's a collaborative project that I do. So it brings together a lot of different expertise and disciplines with our goal of really improving patient safety and well-being. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I just want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this country, and I want to pay my respect to the traditional owners and elders, past and present, of the land on which we stand today. So that is the Jabberthai, Irraganji, and Boonwurrung Yidinji people. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I also want to acknowledge the valuable contribution that Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play and continue to make to James Cook University and the broader community as well. The research that I'm presenting today and all of the resources, including the video scenarios and printed materials, were made possible through the contributions of many individuals from dentistry, from social work, and the domestic and sexual violence sector. So I just want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of my collaborators for their individual support and expertise. And then before I begin, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the victim survivors of domestic and sexual violence and those who have tragically lost their lives. We honor their experiences and commit to supporting clinicians to improving outcomes for those affected. Our work is possible because of the courage and resilience of the victim survivors who shared their stories with us. And we deeply acknowledge those who we've worked with or we've learned from, either through our research, clinical practice, or therapeutic roles. And what we share today is made possible through their strength, their courage, and their resilience. So when we talk about domestic and family violence or sexual violence, we're referring to a range of behaviors that are violent, threatening, controlling, or intending to make someone or their family feel scared or unsafe. And these behaviors can include things like physical violence, so hitting, choking, burning, sexual violence like rape, penetration with objects or unwanted touching, and emotional and psychological abuse like intimidation or humiliation. Domestic violence can also involve causing or threatening injury, coercing someone into sexual activity, damaging property, restricting someone's freedom, making threats of harm or death, threatening suicide in order to intimidate them, harming or threatening to harm pets, stalking, or unauthorized surveillance. And we use the term victim survivor to describe people with direct lived experience of domestic and sexual violence. We're talking about adults, children, young people, and family members, or those who may have even lost their lives. And this term recognizes both the harm caused, but also the strength and resilience of those who endure it. And I want to acknowledge that some people in this presentation here today may have their own experiences of violence, so please keep that in mind throughout this presentation. Language matters, and so I'll be using the term victim survivor in order to respect the lived experience. I also want to note that I am using heteronormative language, and that's because we need to address the gendered nature of domestic violence, but we're also mindful of vulnerable groups and diverse experiences. So today's discussion focuses on a specific type of man that is involved in violence, but it's important to remember this is not all men. And if at any point you feel emotionally impacted by what we're covering today, I want you to please be mindful and take care of yourself and access support. So I've provided some for you on this slide, but there's more resources available at the end of the presentation as well. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm going to go over today. I just want you to keep in mind that this is merely a snapshot of some of the topics that we teach our students. So there's much more to learn, and further education in this area is really essential for dentists. So I strongly encourage you to develop and build your knowledge and skills through ongoing professional development, because the area of domestic violence is quite complex and it's an evolving area of practice. So as dental professionals, we're guided by the clear competencies and policies that that support safe, person-centered care. And that's especially true when we're talking about domestic and family violence. So in 2023, the ADC outlined a new competency for dentists, that they have to be able to recognize, assess, and respond to DFV risks, prioritize patient safety. They need to provide information and refer appropriately. And it also emphasizes the importance of self-determined decision-making, where care is driven by the individual, the family, or community, and interprofessional collaboration. So ensures that we're providing holistic care, it's person-centered care. So knowing when and how to refer to the right health and support professionals as well is really important. So now with this competency 2.4, the ADC really makes it clear that our role is included to recognize and respond to family violence as part of our professional responsibility. And in alignment with that, the Australian Dental Association policy statement reinforces our role in supporting victims of abuse and violence through compassionate, informed dental care. So together, these standards remind us that our responsibilities go beyond just clinical treatment. It really includes creating a safe place, listening without judgment, and connecting patients to the support that they need. Domestic and family violence continues to cast a long shadow across Australia. So our research shows that 4.2 million adults, so about 1 in 5 Australians, have experienced violence or abuse from a partner since the age of 15. And for many, this violence begins in dating relationships. So nearly 1 in 10 women, or 2.3% of men, report harm from a boyfriend or girlfriend. And this risk escalates in intimate partners, where almost a quarter of women, or 7.3% of men, have endured physical violence. Emotional abuse is even more widespread, so it affects about 23% of women and 14% of men. And these numbers are sobering, but the reality becomes even more stark when you're considering the ultimate consequence. And in 2022-23, one woman was killed every 11 days by a current or former partner. So these statistics really underscore the devastating and persistent nature of domestic violence in Australia. And so this is especially relevant for dental professionals. Given the high volume of patients that we see daily, a significant number may have experienced domestic violence. So if you're seeing more than 4 women a day, it's likely that some of them have experienced domestic and family violence. And so these rates are even higher among individuals in the LGBTQIA+ community, who face a disproportionately higher risk of experiencing domestic violence. And our research involving our JCU dental students revealed that over 50% of our 4th-year students reported treating patients that were affected by domestic violence. But by 5th year, this had significantly increased, with over 87% of our students encountering patients who had either disclosed or showed signs of experiencing domestic violence. And so as dental professionals, we're actually in a pretty unique position to notice when something is not right. So a lot of the physical signs of domestic violence happen, like things like bruises or cuts, broken teeth, or even signs of strangulation. They tend to show up in the head, neck, or mouth area. And of course, that's exactly where we're checking. But it's not just the physical signs. We also see patients who are dealing with anxiety or depression or other emotional stress, which can be linked to abuse and can definitely impact their oral health. And dental appointments are usually one-on-one, so that gives patients a bit more privacy, and it can help them feel safe and open up to you a bit more. And unlike medical practitioners, so people may switch around or may change medical practitioners more frequently, but patients tend to stick to the same dentist over time, especially if they have found one that they can really relate to and open up with, but also if they have a number of appointments in order to complete a treatment plan. And so that continuity really builds trust, and we're more likely to notice if something is off. And so I just want to clarify that between a disagreement versus domestic violence. So a disagreement is a normal part of family life, but in a respectful relationship, both partners treat each other as equals. They feel safe and comfortable to share their opinions and concerns, and they're free to be themselves. But that's not the case with domestic violence. So abuse involves words or actions that are intended to hurt someone, but domestic violence goes further than that. So it creates fear for life and impacts everything: physical, emotional, spiritual, mental. It takes away a person's control over their own life. And the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reminds us that individuals in vulnerable groups don't experience more violence because of who they are, but because of the structural inequality and because of discrimination. So community attitudes, including those held by health professionals, can sometimes normalize or excuse violence. And when you combine this with the fact that services can be harder to access, or creates opportunities for this, like all of these factors create opportunities for perpetrators to target these groups. So when we're assessing for possible domestic and family violence, there's some important indicators to keep in mind. So you want to start by observing the patient's behavior. So do they seem nervous, ashamed, or evasive? Do they describe a partner as controlling or easily angered? Next, you want to pay attention to interactions. So does the patient appear uncomfortable around their partner? Does the partner dominate the conversation or do they answer for them? And then maybe look for some inconsistencies. So any explanations for injuries that are vague or maybe unlikely. The physical signs are critical. So bruising on the chest or abdomen, multiple injuries, cuts, injuries, especially during pregnancy, if you have a ruptured eardrum, or most importantly, we're looking for signs of strangulation. So things like neck bruising, voice changing, difficulty swallowing, or petechiae around the eyes, face, or inside the mouth. Other red flags include things like delays in seeking care or patterns of repeated injuries or signs of neglect. But I want you to remember that these indicators alone, they don't confirm abuse, but they should prompt you to ask questions and consider some next steps. So if as a dentist, you're seeing indicators or signs that something isn't right, and you're concerned about the patient's safety and well-being, then a risk assessment tool can help. So using a structured framework ensures that we respond appropriately and consistently. So across Australia, there's evidence-based frameworks that have been developed to help guide screening, risk assessment, safety planning, and risk management. So each kind of state and territory uses their own. And in some states and territories, these frameworks are even mandated across all health services to create kind of like a more unified approach. So why is this important for dentists? Because when you're assessing risk, it isn't just about noticing the injuries. It's about recognizing the patterns, asking the right questions, and knowing what steps to take next. And so these frameworks give you clear guidance. So you're not just guessing at what to do. And it's important to check with your workplace or your organization that if they're using a specific tool, and if you have things like mandatory reporting. So certain areas in Australia do have mandatory reporting. So creating a safe and non-judgmental space for dental patients, especially when we're discussing sensitive topics, require a thoughtful, what we call trauma-informed, patient-centered approach. So when we're thinking about critical thinking, we want to be mindful that even well-intentioned questions can trigger discomfort. So you should consider how your phrasing might be interpreted based on the patient's background, and reflect on how your own biases or assumptions might influence the interaction. Individualize each scenario. So avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. You want to tailor your communication and your care plan based on the patient's needs, their preferences, and their emotional state. Document and respect the patient's disclosures and avoid repeating trauma. And you want to ensure what is safest for the patient. So safety isn't just physical here. We're talking about emotional and psychological as well. So if a patient discloses something sensitive, either let's say domestic violence or an eating difficulty or trauma, prioritize their autonomy and refer appropriately. And collaborate with other professionals. So you need to know kind of your local social worker or trauma counselor and reach out to them when needed. So trauma-informed dental practice means creating a safe, respectful environment through clear communication. You're offering choice and you're understanding the impact of trauma. From my experience, this approach really helps build trust. It reduces the patient's anxiety and it improves treatment outcomes, especially for patients who've experienced domestic and family violence. When patients feel as if they're heard and they're in control, they're more likely to engage with care. And as dentists, we have a legal and ethical responsibility. And that includes knowing your state and territory specific mandatory reporting laws and following our workplace policies. So oftentimes larger organizations often have these systems in place, but when you're working in private practice, the responsibility often falls on the individual. And because there's still a lot of gray area around things like documentation or disclosure, you need to keep going or ongoing with your training and get a strong connection to your local domestic and family violence services. Those connections are really essential because they help you maintain best practice that's consistent and informed. So when we're talking about trauma-informed care, it helps to gently ask if domestic and sexual violence might be part of what the patient is experiencing, and pay attention not only to the words, but their behaviors. And so you can use screening tools and a supportive chat, and that should all happen before treatment, and that can make a big difference for the patient. So we created a web portal that shows you how to respond to various scenarios. Each one comes with an educational resource, and there we have samples of things like scripts. And so they may feel awkward a little bit at first, but you can adapt them to suit your own situation and your own style. It's important to avoid anything that sounds blaming or judgmental. So you want to avoid saying things like, "Why did you stay?" or "How could you let that happen?" or "If I were you." These can feel dismissive and sometimes can shut someone down. So instead, you want to focus on being supportive, validating, and using the appropriate language. So saying things like, "I believe you," or "You don't deserve this," or "It's not your fault," or "Would it help to talk about support options?" So the key here is to be kind, open, and non-judgmental. So you're creating space, and that means a lot. So to help with that, we've created a QR code that links you to our resources. So you can take a moment to scan it now. It's there to support you in navigating these situations so that you can not only do it safely, but confidently. So when a patient of domestic and family violence sees you, it's important to pause and think about how you're going to respond. And there are several key considerations to have here. So first, disclosures are infrequent in a dental setting. So many dentists don't have any prior experience with this. And this can lead to shock, which can affect your ability to assess the risk maybe accurately. Second, you want to be aware of any personal kind of values, myths, and judgments. These can unintentionally influence your response. And so our role is to remain supportive and non-judgmental. And third, while calling 000 might feel like the safest option, it's not always the best choice. There can be unintended consequences, and the patient's safety and wishes always have to come first. So we see this reaction often with our students when they act quickly without considering kind of the broader impact. So remember, consent and knowledge are different. Even when mandatory reporting is in place, you always want to clarify what the patient understands and what they want before taking action. So ultimately, the goal is to prioritize safety, respect autonomy, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. You want to ensure a safe, private, quiet environment when you're speaking with the patient. You want to ensure that you are actively listening, that you ask open-ended questions, that you're not judgmental, that you want to validate their experience and ask the person what it is that they may need help with right now. But also make sure your safety and your boundaries. So rescuing is exhausting. It exhausts everyone. So if there is an immediate threat, I want you to discuss it with that person and what that might mean around your duty of care. But also keep in mind your workplace policies and procedures as well. So since this is relatively a new competency and kind of unfamiliar territory for many practicing dentists, I just wanted to take a moment to demonstrate a possible way to respond when a patient is asked about domestic and sexual violence. So to set this context, this is an example that involves our dentist and dental assistant in a private practice where they're working with a long-term patient, Sharon. So Sharon, her husband, Tony, and their children have been attending the practice for many years, and the dentist, Yusuf, regularly treats the entire family. So this is a very common scenario in private practice. And so during the previous appointment, when Sharon presented with the option of a crown, she displayed signs that could indicate coercive control and financial abuse. So in this scenario, we see our dentist, Yusuf, and the dental assistant, Erin, meeting again with Sharon.
How you going?
Hi, good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Come and take a seat for us. So, how are the kids?
You know, causing chaos wherever they can. Ollie's behaviour towards Kayla's relentless. But as Tony says, boys will be boys.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So look, we're going to try running the consultation a little bit differently today. I've recently completed some training, and here at the clinic, we're trying to provide a more holistic approach to people's care. It's a little new, but are you okay if I ask you some questions?
Sure. Go ahead, Doc.
Great. Some of this information might be a bit sensitive, and I'd like to remind you that all the information disclosed is confidential to this practice, unless you tell me about current child abuse, childhood sexual abuse, or if I'm concerned that you're at immediate or significant risk of harm to yourself, others, or by others. I know this is a lot of information to go through at the beginning of an appointment. We can go over that information again at another time, but if you have any questions at the moment about that information.
Come on, Doc, this seems a bit much. I've been coming here forever. Okay, I'll play along today. No, I don't have any further questions about any of that.
Of course, Melissa, we do appreciate you coming here. We know many women experience violence in their relationship, which can cause health, dental, or other problems. So it's something that I've started to routinely ask people, and it can really help guide our treatment approach. Are you or have you been in a relationship with someone that threatens to or has hurt you in any way?
Yusuf, you know Tony well enough. No, I'm not in a relationship with someone who has hurt me or threatened me.
Erin and I were a little bit concerned about how you responded to having a crown last time. We're a little bit concerned about your well-being.
Tony's concerned about the cost. It's not like he's hitting me. Come on.
We can always find a treatment that's suitable for a patient, regardless of the price, but we are concerned about your health and well-being. Is Tony controlling how you have access to money? Is he telling you how to spend your money?
Or making you feel guilty or intimidating you for spending money?
It's just that the cost of the crown made him really angry. He barely let me come back here today. Tony looks after all of our finances. I don't know anything about it. He gives me a small allowance, and when things like this pop up, he gets angry. There always seems to be enough money for him and what he wants and needs, but not for me and the kids.
Is this money that you earn as well?
Yeah, he takes all of it. If I ask about our money or how he's spending it, he insists he's got it covered. He's in control.
Melissa, we're a little bit concerned about how you're describing your finances at home and how you've got access to money.
These are indicators of financial abuse.
He's not violent. It's not that serious. I don't know.
Financial abuse is only one form of violence. It is rare for only one type of violence to be present in a situation. Hence, it is important to explore other potential forms of violence the patient may be experiencing. This also helps you to gauge potential risks and the safety of your patient. The financial control and other indicators apparent in Melissa's story would suggest that coercive control, along with other forms of violence, are also present.
He's not violent. It's not that serious. I don't know.
Melissa, controlling your finances is a type of domestic abuse. Does Tony ever make you feel afraid or control you or make you feel isolated? If you feel like you're experiencing domestic or sexual violence, we can help. We can call 1-800-RESPECT, and they've got specially trained counsellors that I think might be able to help you.
Are you going to tell Tony about this conversation?
No, absolutely not. Everything you tell us is between us and private and confidential in the practice. In fact, I did have an idea that I wanted to run by you. I've got one of my colleagues, Mimi. She's a dentist and she's lovely, and I think you'll get on really well together. Now, I know that Tony also comes to the practice, but what I was thinking was perhaps you and the children could see Mimi for your future dental care, and then I'll continue to look after Tony's treatment. Would that make you feel more comfortable?
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, so this example really illustrates one possibility or one response when domestic and sexual violence has been identified. And it explores how to navigate the family dynamics when you're the dentist and you're seeing multiple family members while prioritizing the safety and well-being of the victim survivor.
There you go.
There we go. So I've only given you a snapshot of what we teach our students, so there's so much more to explore here. So if this feels like new territory to you or like something you need some extra guidance on, we've made it easy. Just head to our web portal. You'll find the QR code there. And in the web portal, you'll discover 8 video scenarios, and they're each paired with a print resource. There's scripts and prompts for screening patients or starting those sensitive conversations. And the guidance, some guidance on how to handle those tricky situations. So when you're working with patients from culturally and linguistically diverse communities or when the perpetrator is present. But I do want to be clear, this isn't a full training program. These are resources that are designed to be practical, accessible, and immediately useful. And they're there to support you in order to build your confidence in this space. So when we think about consent in dentistry, we usually focus on the clinical treatment, so physical care, risk, and documentation. But when domestic and sexual violence is involved, consent needs to be looked at in a more broader approach. It's not just about what the patient shares, but how we handle that information, where it's stored, and whether it's referred. And this means prioritizing emotional safety, privacy, and understanding the possible consequences of disclosure. So trauma-informed, person-centered consent is essential. So before sharing any information, always obtain informed consent. So explain that while confidentiality is important, that there are limits to it. There may be times when you can or must share information, even if the patient doesn't want you to. The patient should clearly understand that they have the right to withhold personal information. If they disclose experiences of violence, those details may be recorded in their clinical notes. Dental records can be subpoenaed or used as evidence in legal proceedings. Informed consent should also cover what information will be shared, when it will be shared, who it will be shared with and why, how it will be collected, stored, and used, how the patient can access their information. And this approach ensures transparency, it builds trust with your patient, and meets any legal and ethical obligations that you may have. So there are several reasons why patients may hesitate to consent to sharing their information. First, just a safety concern. So victim survivors often fear that details they disclose could be accessed by the abuser, for example, in a legal proceeding. Victim survivors are the experts in knowing their own lives. They have deep insights into the patterns of control, coercion, and harm used by the person who's using violence. And they are the most aware of the profound impacts on themselves, their children, and their families. Second, they may have distrust of authorities due to past experiences or marginalization or discrimination. And this is particularly relevant for LGBTQIA+ individuals or First Nation individuals or culturally diverse communities. And finally, those that live in rural and remote communities also face unique challenges. In small, close-knit populations, patients can worry about things like confidentiality or fear that information could reach family, friends, or the person using violence. So these concerns highlight the importance of clear communication and trauma-informed consent. So one of the biggest misconceptions that patients have is that everything that they share stays completely confidential, no exceptions. But as clinicians, we know that there are limits. And from our perspective, we often hold the full picture. So we have the medical details, the family dynamics, and the financial information. But the real goal is to give that power back to the patient. And that starts with being transparent about confidentiality. And it means when it needs to be breached. So when do we breach confidentiality? Only when the patient's safety is at risk, whether for the patient or others. And these decisions aren't taken lightly. And if you're unsure, we have created a video resource that walks you through the scenario in detail. The key takeaway here is to be upfront, let patients know the boundaries early, but it builds trust and it helps them make informed choices about what they share. So we have a dedicated resource to this. So when confidentiality may need to be breached and some strategies of navigating that with your patient. And remember, these situations are highly context dependent and mandatory reporting requirements always have to be considered. So when a patient discloses something sensitive, our role is to approach it with care. So there's no assumptions, no pressure. From that point, accurate documentation and thoughtful decision-making are really essential. So first, let's talk about documentation. You want to record what the patient shares and your own observations accurately. You want to use objective language, avoid assumptions or any kind of judgment. You want to include time, date, and the context of the conversation. Your notes, you want to note any actions you may take or any referrals you make, and make sure that your notes are secure and compliant with privacy policies. Avoid any unnecessary details that could increase risk if they're shared. And always follow your workplace policy and any kind of mandatory reporting requirements. Next, I want you to consider the decisions you need to make. So does this information increase risk? And if so, should some or all of that be shared outside of your practice? So who can respond appropriately to that risk? Do you have any kind of legal obligation to disclose? Do you have the authority within your workplace to maybe share that information? Always seek consent first, but what if consent isn't given, right? Would sharing that information increase the patient's risk? If disclosure is necessary, who should you share it with? Remember, it's a criminal offense to share this information with anyone other than the prescribed entity, a specialist, domestic and family violence provider, or a support service. And finally, think about what information should be shared. These decisions are complex and context matters. Always weigh mandatory reporting requirements and patient safety before acting. And so the North Queensland Women's Legal Service is about to release our legal guide that's specifically for dental practitioners. And it's designed to make it easier for dentists to understand their legal responsibilities and best practice when supporting patients who may have experienced domestic and family violence. So to stay updated or to access that guide when it becomes available, you can head to their website. But that will be available, and it talks a lot about consent and note-taking, which are often issues that we get questions about. So if you want evidence-based resources on supporting patients affected by domestic and family violence, check out our JCU web portal. It offers practical guides and videos on trauma-informed care, legal and ethical considerations, and working with diverse communities. Also, the North Queensland Women's Legal Service will soon release our legal guide for dental practitioners to help you kind of understand your obligations and best practice. For practical tools and videos on trauma-informed dental care, you can visit Dr. Sharon Zach's website. She has a variety of videos, but I would especially recommend her resources from the patient's perspective. These materials help dentists support very anxious patients and creates a safe, kind of compassionate environment. And then there's an excellent resource called Treating Patients Impacted by Domestic Violence, a guide for dental teams, and it was developed in collaboration with the JCU Dentistry Social Work, the ADA, and a Cairns Regional Domestic Violence Service. And this guide includes a video and a document that helps the whole dental team provide trauma-informed care and understand what best practice is in supporting patients. And if you want to find local resources, you can always use 1-800-RESPECT. They'll bring you to resources that are local to you. And this is a list of services that are free of charge available across Australia. And so I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on this important topic. And I hope you found the information helpful and practical. And if you have any questions, comments, or queries, I'm happy to answer anything that's talked about. Please feel free to reach out. So here's my contact information. And here are some resources, but I'll share those resources with the team after.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. That was eye-opener. It's something that absolutely everyone should keep in mind. We're talking about all this information sort of in the Australian environment, but as we know, no matter where you practice, where you live, anywhere in the world, this is unfortunately something that we can see across borders, races, social classes, and even though there are some high-risk groups, you can see it everywhere. So we should all try to do something, raise awareness, preparedness, in case that we face this in the professional practice and even in our personal life. So thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge and information with us. And we've received lots of questions. Some of them are sort of coming up over and over again. Some other ones are a little bit different. So please stay with us. And we will call Natalie back for the Q&A session, if that's okay.
I'm here.
Thanks for joining us again, Natalie. So as I said, we have been receiving different questions regarding both of your presentations. We got lots of interest with both of them, and we have chosen a couple of questions for you too. And I would like to remind you all that if your question wasn't chosen today, but you had a good one, we will be doing our best to answer them and post them with the webinar when the webinar is up in the ADC website. Okay, so our first question for Natalie. Are there any, I know you answered a couple of questions in the chat, but many people can only see the questions and they don't know there's an answer part. So we are going to repeat a couple of those ones. Are there any visitors visas that allow up to 12 months stay in one go?
So there's limited options in that area, but the visa subclass 600, the visitor visa that I discussed, can be granted for up to 12 months, but you would really, or an applicant would really need to demonstrate why they would need to stay for 12 months as a genuine visitor, and they would need to demonstrate how they can support themselves on a visa where you're unable to work. So yes, there is a visa. It is the subclass 600 visa, but it's not commonly approved for a 12-month period unless there's strong evidence to support the reasons for the stay.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we have a couple of similar ones. People that are over 45 years old, they want to know if there's any permanent resident options for people above 45 years old. Well, there's some specific questions, but yeah.
I did see, and I started to answer, but there were so many and they were very similar. So I'm glad you've asked me this question. What I should really have said right at the beginning, because I know we weren't going to have extensive Q&A, is that as a Home Affairs officer, I'm unable to provide migration advice. Migration advice in Australia is regulated, and it does need to come from a registered migration agent or a legal practitioner when we're talking individual circumstances. So all the information that I've provided today and what I will provide in a moment on that question is that it's general information and applied, just sort of across the board. Everybody's individual circumstances may have different pathways possible that might be open to them, and for that type of support you really do need to seek the services of a migration agent. And on that last page of useful links was a link to the website where all Australian registered migration agents are registered, and it's a very, very useful link to have because it helps you do some research to find. It doesn't just list them, it actually provides information on them and would help you limit or narrow down the ones that maybe have the experience and can provide you support in your area that you want to. So whether that be for a long visitor stay or if it's a pathway for someone who's over a particular age. So I will circulate that. Well, I won't circulate, but I'll provide it to be circulated. But just in general terms, someone who is over 45 does have limited options to come and move to Australia. The Australian government does need to address that ageing population that we have in Australia, and so therefore the pathways are limited, but that does not mean that there aren't any pathways. So outside of the standard visa program, there are also labour agreements, and there's a range of different labour agreements. There's, three main ones. One is an industry one, which the dental industry doesn't have. The other one is a company-specific labour agreement, but then the other very commonly used one is a DAMA, which is a designated area migration agreement, which is a type of labour agreement. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So, for example, South Australia as a state has a DAMA, which has some special concessions that they have negotiated with the Australian government to fill some of the skill shortages they have. And so what any labour agreement essentially does, it has some concessions built in, and they sit often around age, sometimes around what occupations are on there, sometimes around the level of qualification, sometimes it might be around the level of English that someone needs to speak. It might be a slight reduction to the standard visa products. So there are a number of DARMAs. I could reel some of them off, but I really think that, again, it will be a link that I will provide to the labour agreements page on the Home Affairs website, but have a look at the DARMAs. There are a number of DARMAs that provide pathways for dentists up to around the age of 55. The South Australian DARMA is one, the Western Australia DARMA is another one. In Victoria, there are 2 DARMAs of smaller regions, not a whole state one. The Great South Coast region provides a pathway for someone over 45. It would be a requirement that the person lives in that area and gets nominated by an employer that's been approved to use that labour agreement. But there are a number of them across the country that do have age concessions built in, and that includes for dentists. I had a quick look while I was waiting for this Q&A, and I can see that there's definitely dentists represented on those lists.
Thank you for that. And one more question, if we can squeeze it in. I saw it coming up many times as well. So what is the recommended time frame for submitting a visa application prior to the anticipated travel date? Okay, so our visas vary significantly in terms of the processing times. Most, particularly the ETA and the e-visa, gets processed very quickly if it's straightforward, but sometimes there's things like, for example, if someone is from a country where there is there's polio active or some other other health condition where they may need to do a health check. So it really depends if it's affected by some of those type of delays. There is, on the Home Affairs website, there is a visa processing tool. So when you go into the visa that you're looking to apply for, it will give you the average time for a visa to be processed. Now, I cannot stress enough that providing a complete application at the time of lodgement, so don't put it in and then add things in the account later, because they get triaged almost, so to speak, right from the beginning. And if one is complete at time of lodgement, it will be processed faster than an incomplete application where the department may or may not write to you and ask for further information. If they don't, your application will be refused. If they do, they give you 28 days to provide that information. They will not look at your application again in that 28 days because you've been given that time, and legally we need to wait that time to provide you that time to submit anything missing or anything additional that we may request. So the best you can do is to submit a complete application, use the guides that I've suggested, and that will be circulated to you. But an ETA visa or an e-visa, they're done within a day, can be done within a day. They're very, very quick. The 600 will be dependent on what information they're looking at. Those timeframes can vary, but also relatively quick. The other visas, the ones that we talked about, where we're talking skills in demand visas, they can take sort of anywhere from, depending on what stream they're coming from, potentially a month, could be 2 months, could be 3 months. It really depends. But the visa processing tool is updated monthly, and so it's a fairly good indication of how long it takes for a visa to be processed. It does factor in those applications that are incomplete. So if you look at it and it looks really, like a long wait, it can be, but if you have a complete application, you'll be in the sort of shorter time frame of the range that it provides. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie, for all that information. Now we're going to move on to some questions for Alex. So Alex, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I have a couple of questions in here. We'll see how we're going with time, but the first one is, what if you suspect something but aren't sure and do not get a chance to speak to a patient privately? It's a bit tricky.
Yeah, so there's certain things, ways that you can navigate around that. So I would always try and rebook the patient again to get them back so that you do get that opportunity. Dealing when you're treating patients with domestic and family violence, I mean, there's no one all way of just doing it. There's a lot of shades of gray, especially when you're learning. You might miss those initial opportunities. So creating more opportunities for yourself. I would also maybe put a note to yourself, not directly, but maybe indirectly in the notes that prompts you to maybe check in with that patient next time. Or you can always call them to see if they'd like to come back for a review appointment or something like that. There are ways of navigating around that.
Now, there is another one in here. I thought particularly it was very interesting. It says, I would like to ask for advice regarding domestic violence against children. When I worked in pediatric dentistry, I sometimes encountered children with extensive dental caries or rampant caries. Some parents eagerly brought their children to the dentist, but others brought their children once because they complained of toothache and then never came again. I suspect it was neglect, domestic violence, but I couldn't be sure. Could you please give some advice on how dentists should intervene in the cases if possible?
Yeah, so I can speak to this from a rural and remote perspective as well, that sometimes parents don't see rampant caries as severe disease just because of a lack of education. And so that can sometimes be seen as not neglect. But if you have any concerns about child abuse, childhood sexual abuse, that is mandatory reporting. And so I would encourage you to report it.
Thank you. And we have one more question for you. In cases of domestic violence I think you responded actually this later in the presentation, but we'll touch on it again. In case of domestic violence, one of the scenarios said that the information is not written in the patient note, at least they wish, but if this information about domestic violence is risky for the safety of the patient, what could be the most appropriate management if the patient do not want us to write anything on the notes or refer to anyone, but we still consider the patient is at some risk?
Yeah, so with regards to the notes aspect, facts are facts are facts. And so I would be very clear with your patient and transparent that I'm going to write about the physical signs that I'm seeing extraorally, intraorally in the hard tissues. But I would really question when you're writing your notes is, why do I have to include that? Am I including that because I think it's important, or because it's part of the case, or just out of personal interest? You can take it the same as as if the patient is reading those notes. And so if they don't want something included and it's not absolutely necessary for the case or for their exam or for their treatment, it does not have to be in the notes. So I would keep that in mind. Yeah, so when you're writing your notes, I know this is a lot, there's a lot of discretion and shades of gray, but facts are facts. Remove your bias. You're not telling a story. It's not narrative. You're being very objective in your notes, and write quotes from the patient. And if they want to include some details that maybe they can apply for victim services later in the track, or if they want it recorded for the sake of making a legal claim against someone later in the track, then you can. But if it's absolutely not necessary to your appointment, you do not have to include it in the notes.
Thank you so much for all that knowledge again, for sharing that with us. And now we're going to conclude the first session of this forum. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Natalie. And we are going to move on to the second part of the forum. We have Dr. Martin Webb that joined us a little bit late, but we saw you there. How are you, Martin?
Well, thank you.
Lovely to have you here with us.
Thank
And
you for inviting me.
Dr. Martin will be talking about using item numbers appropriately when treating and billing patients in an Australian content. So thank you so much again for squeezing us in your very busy schedule today. And Dr. Martin Webb is a general dentist in private practice on the sunny coast. He's an honorary senior lecturer at the University of Sydney School of Dentistry and an ATH lecturer at the University of Queensland School of Dentistry. He also works at the Australian Dental Council as an examiner. He has served the profession in the ADA for over 25 years, being a federal counselor for 10 years and the state president for ADAQ in 2007. He has conducted CPD lectures and webinars over 10 years for ADAQ and ADA Federal, and recently for ADA Victoria, Dental Hygienist Association of Australia, and Australian Dental and Oral Health Therapist Association. Dr. Webb gives lectures at 8 universities around Australia for Bachelor of Oral Hygiene and Dentistry students, and is a final year external examiner for UQ. Dr. Martin acts as a Dental Board of Australia approved auditor, mentor, and educator to assist dentists with conditions on their APRA registration, and he has been awarded FICD for the International College of Dentists, FPFA of the Pierre Fauchard Academy, and FADI of the Academy of Dentistry International. So once again, as I said before, Dr. Martin will be educating us about the appropriate use of item numbers when treating and billing patients in an Australian context. Welcome again, Dr. Martin Webb, and this is all yours.
Thank you very much, Trini, and thank you very much to the staff at ADC for inviting me to come and talk to you this afternoon. This is a detailed and complex lecture. This is likely to go for a fairly long time, and we're going to cover a lot of documents. When I train other dentists in this area, I always try and refer them to the professional documents that I talk about in the lectures. So don't just listen to me. I strongly recommend, as part of this lecture, you go to the source material that I will talk about and try and read this stuff for yourself, because I won't have time in a 1-hour lecture to go through a 70-page document and explain everything that's in that document. So the purpose of this is to bring your attention to a whole range of documents that are out there in the Australian context. They will be helping you to guide you as to how to do this stuff properly with regards to using item numbers in Australia. And more importantly, not just the understanding of the item numbers themselves, but how to do it properly, because a lot of people don't know what they're doing or get told by others to do it improperly. And then they find that they're in trouble with health funds, or they're in trouble with regulators. So let me see if my share screen thing is working, and hopefully you can see, yes, that's looking good. That looks all right. Okay, so I'm just going to get this slideshow started from the beginning. Okay. There we go. So what we're going to look at here is the issue of using item numbers appropriately when treating and billing patients in an Australian context. And I guess the starting point that I'm talking about this topic, I'm assuming many of the candidates that we're talking to haven't worked in Australia and haven't seen the ADA item numbers, haven't billed a patient yet because they're not qualified in Australia yet. So this is an educational program from the very beginning of the whole process. So first of all, what is the guidance book here in this area or in this space? In Australia, the Australian Dental Association publishes a book called the Australian Schedule of Dental Services and Glossary. Fortunately, in Australia, we have a fairly cohesive system where the whole country uses the same book and uses the same system. with the exception of a couple of areas such as Department of Veterans Affairs and Medicare. So when you bill young patients under the Child Dental Benefits Schedule, that is very similar to the ADA schedule with some minor changes. Now, the ADA puts out a new schedule roughly every 4 years. I'm aware that the ADA Schedule Committee is currently working on the work towards the 14th edition of the schedule, which is due for release sometime next year, if all goes to plan. So, once again, I try to draw your attention to where to get these documents and how to find this information. So the easiest thing to do is to Google, download ADA schedule, maybe add in the word Australia if you're not actually in Australia at the same time, because that might download the American ADA schedule. But if you're looking for this, you can also grab it from the website there, the ADA website. There's a public section of the Australian Dental Association website, which is available to everyone. And there's also a lot of documents that are behind the member paywall that you'll be able to get to once you're a member of the Australian Dental Association. When I teach this area around Australia, particularly at universities, I recommend to keep a copy of the PDF file of the ADA schedule on each computer station that you work at in your workplace. When you are learning this document and when you're starting to work in Australia, I highly recommend that you download the copy that you can get from Google or off the internet and have a good read of it. There's a lot of very useful information in the document. So when you hit Google and you do a search for this document, this is the web page that pops up. This is the Australian Dental Association web page, and then you can go down to here where it says download PDF, hit that button, and it should pop up on your computer. At least it did for me. Okay, so I guess from the very beginning, I need to define what is an item number. Now, each of you from different parts of the world will probably have a different system for how to code and how to itemize dental treatments. I believe the American Dental Association has a book about yay thick of thousands and thousands of item codes. In the Australian Dental Association, there's been a concerted effort to try and keep it not too big and to keep it generalised so that everyone can use the same book around the country. So the Australian Dental Association, ADA, assigns a 3-digit number, which is called an item number, to describe clinical procedures it considers to be part of current dental practice. Now, the ADA is advised on that area by a whole range of bodies, including health funds, specialist dental societies, universities, and any layperson, any average dentist around the country or a professor can actually put in their own submission to the ADA to say, we believe this is what should be put in as a new item number. As a general rule, an item number describes a treatment outcome. It doesn't describe every single version of that treatment that can be done. For example, you might cut a hole in a tooth to do a restoration. You might use a high-speed handpiece, or if you're fancy, you might use some form of laser machine or some other technique. The outcome of the treatment is the restoration. It's not the technique that you've used to cut the hole in the tooth. It's a really good idea to understand the whole book. There are a lot of sections in the book with FAQs or guidance. So frequently asked questions about how to itemize certain types of treatments. For example, complex dentures. Maybe you're a dentist that does a lot of implants or implant retained bridges or various forms of orthodontics. It's a great idea to read the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, and the notes for guidance. Notes for guidance is in the front section of the ADA schedule from approximately pages 7 to 15. And there are a number of examples there of how to itemize correctly. So if you have a doubt, if you have any confusion, even as a non-ADA member, even if you're not registered currently in Australia, you can email the ADA. The simple email address there is contact@ada.org.au. You can ask a simple question such as, what do I itemise this particular procedure as? Or you might have some complex thing where there's a very sophisticated dental treatment that you're undertaking and you're just not sure. If in doubt, ask is the best advice I can give you, because it's important to get it right in the first place. If you get it wrong, you may find the claim through the health fund is rejected, or if the health fund does decide to pay out on the claim, they may come back to you later on and say, look, you've claimed this incorrectly, therefore pay us the money back. Health funds often come back at you in the future wanting their money back. So what is the essence of this? I understand a lot of dental practices have a practice management computer system, which may have a number such as 615, and the number might say full crown or something simple like that. When you actually read the schedule actually says a lot more detail than that. And you actually need to read the descriptor from the schedule book to make sure that you actually understand what it is you're actually claiming. So I stress go back to the source reference document, which in this case is the ADA schedule, and read it thoroughly. If you're not sure, ask someone, ask the dentist that you're working for in the new job when you finish the ADC process, or you can directly email the ADA. It's especially important when you start claiming for treatment for children under the Medicare schedule, CDBS, because the Medicare descriptors are sometimes subtly different to the ADA descriptor for a similar item number. And the Medicare rules state that payment for treatment provided under the scheme is only due to you as the dentist if the full item number descriptor for that service has been met. It's also great advice to new dentists to Australia that don't always rely upon the advice of CPD courses that you may attend. It's very often the case that dentists attend a course put on by somebody who sponsors the course. They may have a financial interest in promoting a new technique or a new technology or some new tool, and then they advise the dentists who are attending that conference that they should use this item number to describe the service. Often that's not correct information. I have come across instances where dentists have suddenly started claiming certain numbers for treatments that they were not entitled to, and then the health fund has come back and said, no, you've claimed incorrectly for that item procedure, and you've got to pay us back $30,000. That's not a good day. For example, some people might say to you, using a fluoride-containing prophy paste, sorry for my spelling error there for the prophy, does not satisfy the use of a 121 item code. So it's important to understand which ADA item numbers often end up being audited. And then this is going to help you to understand how to do those numbers correctly. Now, 011, when you look at many practice management software, will say initial exam, 011 initial exam. But when you actually read the ADA schedule, it's probably about 15 lines of writing. And it talks about a comprehensive evaluation. It applies to new and established patients. You may require interpretation of additional information, such as other diagnostic procedures. So take the time to go and read the source document and actually understand what's required of you. Radiography intraorally, 022, is intraoral radiograph per exposure. And when you read the descriptor, it actually says taking and interpreting an intraoral radiograph. As was mentioned in my introduction, I do a lot of work in assisting dentists when they're in trouble with the regulators in Australia, and the Dental Board of Australia is wanting dentists to interpret their own radiographs. So the Dental Board, when they look at your records, is expecting you to be able to do some kind of report or interpretation of whatever form of radiography you've undertaken, such as an intraoral radiograph. So don't just put down in your records, left bite wing taken. You need to show what does that left bite wing actually show. So what kind of things am I talking about here? This is the old style radiographic report taken off a paper chart from many years ago. But some of the oldies are pretty much gold. So this is a great example of what to expect and what the Dental Board of Australia would expect of you with regards to what you should report on with your own x-rays. So missing teeth, horizontal resorption, angular resorption of the jawbone, furcation involvement of molars, thickened PDM, periapical pathology, obviously caries, overhangs, and anything to do with endodontics. I want to cover a few specific item numbers. This is an interesting one where 041 is often a case where a dental supply company has brought out a U-Butte new tool or some kind of new dye and has said to dentists, you can use it and you can use 041 if you're using this particular treatment. In reality, it often turns out that the technology behind that new system is some kind of plaque disclosing solution or a dye to stain plaque. 041 technically is an examination for bacteria or other microorganisms in samples obtained from the patient, which means that to satisfy the definition of this item number, you need to actually take a sample from the patient, maybe it's plaque, maybe it's calculus or some other sample, and test it for bacteria or other microorganisms in a similar way that a medical practitioner or someone working in the medical field would do the same thing for a sample of another part of the body. So if the technique that you're using is mainly about plaque disclosing solution or some new technique, but it doesn't actually do a bacteriological sample, you can't use 041. A pulp test should ideally include pulp sensibility testing for the tooth of interest, the adjacent teeth, and or the opposing contralateral teeth, and document the records from that. So we understand 061 is a pulp test, but you actually need to understand the full definition. It's about a non-invasive test to determine the clinical status of the pulp. Is the pulp reacting, or is the pulp having zero reaction, which means there could be definite pulpal pathology present. 071 is a frequently misused item number. 071 is a diagnostic model per model, and this is the production of a physical model from an impression or digital data. That means it's something you actually hold. It's not a scanned image on your computer, because that's clearly not a physical model. And the purpose of this physical model is for examination and treatment planning and other purposes. It's not designed to be used, this item number, with the cases where you're actually making something. So if you're making a denture, if you're making an orthodontic appliance, if you're making an occlusal splint or mouthguard, 071 is not applicable. This is an area that gets a lot of dentists into trouble. 072, 073 are photographic records of your patient per appointment. These are images taken either inside or outside of the mouth. And why is this an area that seems to be frequently audited? Some practitioners believe there's a good reason to take an 072 for every single time they see the patient and bill for it. But what's lacking in the records is some kind of clinical reason or rationale for undertaking that particular procedure. So just because an item number is there in the schedule is not a good enough reason to claim it for your patient on a regular basis. 113 is a recontouring and polishing of pre-existing restorations per appointment. This does not apply to reshaping your own filling if you've made the filling yourself for your patient, and then that filling needs adjusting. This is a recontouring of a pre-existing restoration, as shown here on the example bite wings on the screen. Item 114 is pretty obvious. It's the removal of calculus first appointment. And if you're claiming for 114, it's good practice to record in your clinical records the technique used to remove the calculus and which teeth had calculus on them when you removed it. This is especially important when claiming under Medicare. So if you're claiming the Medicare version of this item number, which is 88114, because the Medicare system adds on their own 88 to the beginning of the ADA item number, you may find that they will ask you a question afterwards: which teeth did you scale and which teeth had subgingival or supragingival calculus on them? And if your records don't show enough detail, they may ask you to pay money back to Medicare. Item number 123 is application of a karyostatic agent per tooth. This should be demonstrated in your clinical records if you choose to use item number 123, a diagnosis of which tooth you actually need to use an application of a karyostatic agent, and record the tooth number and what agent you actually used, including the dosage and concentration. 161 is fissure sealing and/or tooth surface sealing per tooth. This is the sealing of non-carious pits, fissures, smooth surfaces or cracks in a tooth with an adhesive material. Clinical records, if you're going to use 161, should show the fissure sealing technique, the material used, and the clinical reason or rationale for why you've undertaken this treatment. Those of you familiar with the ICDAS system of classifying decay in teeth would know that if you have an ICDAS 2, 3, 4, 5 or higher, that you may find that you cannot claim for a fissure sealant, because that would technically be a carious pit and fissure, not a non-carious pit and fissure. 221 is a clinical periodontal analysis and recording. This is a special examination performed as part of the diagnosis and management of a periodontal disease for a patient. It consists of assessing and recording the patient's periodontal condition. The ADA does not specifically mention a type of periodontal analysis. You can use the one that you prefer to use. Maybe that's CPITN, maybe that's PSR, or maybe that's 6 points per tooth periodontal probing and recording. Many dentists choose to use 221 as a screening tool every time they see the patient, but that's actually not accurate, because many dentists fail to record an actual periodontal analysis because they're not recording in their notes a bone level, a probing depth, or any record of the condition of the periodontal tissues, such as bleeding on probing, suppuration, recession, etc. A common query that comes through for the ADA is, must a 221 be completed before you use the more complex and deeper cleaning numbers, such as item numbers 222, 250, 251? The ADA does not specify or stipulate this in the schedule book itself. However, it's good practice to undertake treatment for patients with advanced gum disease with some kind of decent analysis and recording of the pre-existing conditions. Otherwise, however, how are you going to see the improvement the patient's going to make from the work that you're doing in trying to help them with their periodontal disease? 222 is the mechanical removal of biofilm and calculus from a periodontally diseased tooth. Technically, that means the tooth needs to have a diagnosis of pre-existing periodontal disease. So if you just add in 222 just for fun, for every patient that has a scale and clean, that would not be appropriate unless you've undertaken some kind of diagnosis of a periodontal disease. So once again, I emphasize back to the issue of clinical rationale. If you're going to use an ADA item number, there should be a clinical rationale for why you've actually chosen to use that number. 250 is a much more involved item number for a more advanced form of gum disease. So this is the non-surgical management of uncontrolled periodontal disease in a quadrant. So this is a per quadrant item number with at least 3 teeth. And there must be clinical attachment loss of at least 3 millimeters or pocketing of at least 4 millimeters. Now it does include the other item numbers. So what this means is that if you choose to itemize as 250, you cannot at the same time itemize or bill the patient for the simpler versions of periodontal cleaning, such as 111, 114, 115, and 222. So it's one or the other. Now, specifically in that definition, when you read that, it says the quadrant must have at least 3 teeth. So for example, if you have advanced gum disease in a patient and quadrant 4 only has 2 teeth, 4, 6, and 4, 4, and all the other teeth are missing, you cannot use 250 for that quadrant. In that case, you would use 222 for those individual teeth in that quadrant. Item 251 is what you do when you have a more advanced gum disease patient that's been treated with the initial therapy. This is per appointment, not per quadrant. And this is your choice to use this for those patients on an ongoing basis if you want to use 251. Common queries for these item numbers. Should you use a item number such as 251 after you've completed a course of advanced periodontal care using 250 by 4 or by 3 if you only have 3 quadrants? The answer is there's no absolute requirement to use 251, but you can choose to use 114 or 251. It's up to you. Okay, this is a great flow chart that was given to the ADA by the periodontal specialist groups, and it gives you a really good explanation of how to bill and how to use periodontal item numbers in an Australian context. So the questions in blue are coming down the screen from top right down to the middle. In each quadrant in the mouth, is there at least 3 teeth with clinical attachment loss of at least 3 mil or pocketing of at least 4 mil? If the answer is yes, then you can use 250 for that quadrant and then go back to the same question to answer the next quadrant. If the answer is no, and within that quadrant there may be 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 periodiseased teeth requiring removal of supra or subgingival calculus deposits. If the answer is yes, then you can use 222 for those affected teeth. And if there are no periodiseased teeth in that quadrant, then you drop down to the next box, which is no here. Are there teeth with periodontitis, but with supra and subgingival calculus deposits? Sorry, teeth without periodontitis down here. If the answer is yes, and there was calculus present, then you drop down to 114 for the entire appointment, regardless of how many teeth. And if the answer is no, and there's no calculus, and there's no periodontitis present, then you can just do a 111 if there is plaque removal required or stain removal. If there's no plaque present and no stain on the teeth, you don't need to use any cleaning number at all. Extractions of teeth. For simple extractions, the 311 is the code you use for a simple extraction of a tooth or part thereof when there's no complexity to the procedure. If the treatment becomes sectional and you need to remove the tooth in sections, then 314 is the appropriate item number to use for that. And that may involve bone removal. In the ADA schedule, it does say that sutures and hemostatic agents used as part of the extraction procedure are not to be billed separately. They are part of the procedure. So if the treatment is done by you as the dentist and that patient ends up with a dry socket or an alveolar osteitis, as the same practitioner, you do not have another number you can use for post-operative care. However, if the patient has come to your practice from another practice where they've had the tooth out, 986 is able to be used. In restorative procedures and itemisation of restorative treatment for patients, some cases there may be where you use two materials in the same restoration. To itemise correctly, you itemise the predominant material type as the final restoration. For example, if you're using a sandwich technique, you may have a GIC material as the deeper layer of the restoration, and then you place a composite material on top of the GIC as the final layer. You itemise the composite material only. You ignore the GIC as it's more or less a base layer. It's a common question when new dentists to Australia are trying to work out what to do with surface descriptions and how to bill and itemise the surface descriptions and the different sections of a tooth. So we itemise a surface by line angles. So you have 5 main parts of a tooth. For a molar, for example, you have buccal, lingual, mesial, distal, occlusal. So you may have a complex restoration that goes from buccal across the occlusal over to the mesial. That'd be a 3-surface restoration. Now, there are cases, it's not very common, but there are cases where you place many restorations on the same surface. For example, a molar may have occlusal decay in the front of the tooth, and then there's nothing wrong with the middle of the tooth, and a further section of occlusal decay in the rear of the tooth. If you're placing 2 separate fillings in that same tooth, that is appropriate to code as just one filling. I know of one dentist, when I saw an audit result, he'd managed to bill 5 composite fillings, 531, in one tooth. That's obviously not appropriate. 615 is a porcelain fused to metal type crown, and this is an artificial crown constructed with a metallic base, veneered with a tooth colour material, usually porcelain. If you're going to provide 615, your clinical record should include the details of the treatment provided, including the laboratory invoice, the lab card or request for the crown, the dates of the appointments for the prep and insert, and most health funds for a treatment such as a crown will only rebate upon the insertion of the crown. Partial dentures are codified in Australia under the definition of 721, 722 for acrylic dentures, 727, 728 for partial cobalt chromium dentures, cast metal. And then the individual teeth are codified as 733. When you claim for a full denture, you don't use 733 per tooth. Orthodontic treatment claiming is an area that seems to generate a lot of confusion by practitioners. Whereas As a dentist, you may place a restoration, such as a filling. You have a simple procedure. You do the treatment once. You itemise that treatment once as a single filling. Orthodontics is often a complex procedure over a lot of visits, which may take over 1 to 2 or even longer years. One number, general terms, describes the treatment performed for the entire procedure, and then all subsequent visits for orthodontic care are not to be billed with any separate number. So, for example, 871 is the standard one that some dentists are billing for adjustment of an orthodontic appliance, and they want to use that on a regular basis when there is the adjustment done for the patient's care. The answer is, if you're asking the question, what can you bill for those particular visits? And the answer is, there is no item number to bill for that. So 825 is sequential plastic aligners. This is the provision and periodic direct clinical review by a qualified dentist or orthodontist of a series of custom-made plastic retainers, aligners, to move teeth gradually. This item number includes any composite buttons. It also includes any interproximal stripping or any reduction interproximally. For retention, you'd use item numbers 811 and 845. Similarly to the other orthodontic item numbers, 825 is for a course of care and should be claimed once only. All subsequent visits are included in the course of care and should not be itemised as 871. This is an area that tends to get a lot of dentists into trouble. For example, with professional indemnity insurance and people suing you. So you need to make sure that you're doing this work correctly and that you have the appropriate training in this area before you start undertaking this kind of work for your patients. The clinical records that you keep for your patient, similarly to an orthodontist, should include an orthodontic diagnosis after you've done a detailed orthodontic assessment. There should be a treatment plan, and there should be an invoice kept and saved in the records from the supplier for the aligners. Full arch banding 831. Once again, that is the code that's used in many practice management software. So when dentists look up what an 831 is, they go, oh, that's full arch banding fixed ortho. When you go to the ADA schedule, it actually says this long definition here. And once again, it includes ongoing adjustments. It includes any interproximal stripping. It includes the replacement of arch wires. And if you're going to be using additional procedures such as retention appliances, you may use 811 or 845. Once again, 831 is for a course of care and should be claimed once only. At the end of the day, the buck stops with you as the practitioner to choose and appropriately itemise the service that you do. Best practice would be that that's you and your job, not the front desk job and not ancillary staff, because you are responsible for listing the item numbers for the patient's records. You need to be careful when you start working in Australia that sometimes the front office staff, if you're very unlucky, may go into the habit of adding in extra item numbers to the bill, which sometimes the dentist is not even aware of. And you may find out in the event of a health fund audit that there's a whole bunch of extra item numbers that have been claimed under your provider number that you know nothing about. Sadly, in the event of an investigation, it's not the ancillary staff or the front office girl that actually gets in trouble. It's you. So if the health fund wants their money back, it's got to come from your pocket, not from any other staff. So be very careful of that particular issue. As a dentist, you should offer to provide the service that your patient requires regardless of restrictions or private health insurers' business rules relating to that service. Because once you start dealing with private health insurance, you'll find out they have a lot of restrictions on certain services per year, per appointment, and they will put in restrictions on what you're allowed to do. The 13th edition of the ADA schedule is the definitive and authoritative description of dental services rendered within Australia. Third parties and other bodies that use the schedule are not entitled to place their own definitions or interpretations. However, you will find in many cases that the health funds will come back and say, you can't use that because the ADA said. And in many cases, that's not actually what the ADA said. So commercial decisions by health funds and third parties sometimes do place limits or utilisation rules on your procedures that could be annual or per procedure. That does not imply that the continued provision of those services by the provider is inappropriate. What I mean by that is a health fund may say to their patient or to their client, you get £1 rebate per year, but you, as the dentist, have chosen to do £4 for that patient. What you need to explain to your patient is that part of their treatment will be refunded by the private health insurance, and a lot of it will be coming out of their own pocket due to the fact that the health insurance has limits on the amount they'll pay per year. If you enter a contractual arrangement with third parties, such as the fact that your practice you're working in is part of a preferred provider agreement, then there are strict requirements in the claiming process through electronic machines such as HICAPs that remain the responsibility of the contracted provider. In most cases, Medicare claims can only be made after the completion of the dental treatment. So in this topic, I wanted to cover what are the consequences if you're billing and itemising the dental treatment if it's done incorrectly. What can happen to you? The most common of these is what's called a health fund audit. This is where a health fund will actually look at the data they have from your practice and look at whether you're billing appropriately or not. Government agencies and private health insurers will keep a record of all the services that you provide, and they will do a statistical analysis of this data to create a servicing profile of you individually using your provider number. Health funds have very sophisticated computer programs and teams of experienced analysts to look at that data and analyse the system of claiming that you do. So why do health funds audit dentists in Australia? It's the health funds wanting to protect their membership, and they don't want to use their money they collect from their members to make payment for inappropriate claims. Fraud, waste and abuse of the claims process is taken very seriously by the funds, and they will ask you to pay money back to them. Serious cases of fraudulent claims, they are a criminal offence, and any criminal offence can adversely affect your professional registration with AHPRA. So what are the consequences to you as a practitioner if you get involved in a health fund audit and it doesn't end up well for you? Serious cases of health fund fraud can result in derecognition of the provider by the health fund. What this means is that the dentist will no longer be recognised by that health fund as an approved provider who can provide rebates for that treatment. So in that case, what that means is that your patient that is a member of that health fund will often be contacted by the health fund to say, we no longer recognise your dentist as a dentist, and therefore if you keep going there, we will actually not pay a rebate. This can have a devastating effect financially on the practice. I have seen this happen where dental practices have gone broke because they can't pay their staff, they can't pay their bills because all the money dries up in the practice. Very serious and very rare cases on the extreme end of this situation of health insurance fraud can result in the dentist being sent to jail. So this is obviously a good take-home lesson from this lecture. Do it properly in the first place, and this won't be you. This is a case study of a prosecution of a dentist and a practice manager where they put through ridiculous amounts of claims for one patient. This happened to be the mother of the practice manager. The treatment included over 1,100 5-surface fillings, so 525s, 535s, where you're restoring an entire tooth in a resin material or something similar. They also claimed over a 5-month period 7 4-surface fillings, 83 surface fillings, 108 1-surface fillings. Remember, you've only got 28 teeth in your mouth if you've got most of them except wisdom teeth. They also claim for 14 teeth extractions, 17 bleaches, 7 fluoride treatments, and 72 recontouring fillings, and allegedly took 260 radiographs of one patient. So when this gets investigated, this often ends up in a trial in a court. In this case, the claim from the practice put through $376,000 worth of treatment for one patient. And the health fund, God knows why, paid to the practice $177,000. A lot of these treatments were obviously excessive, unreasonable, or in some cases impossible. For example, the dentist claimed for an extraction of a tooth and shortly afterwards claimed for a filling on that same tooth, followed by a crown on that same tooth that had been previously extracted. This gets into the media. This gets into the public domain. It gets into the front page of the papers. In this case, this was a public thing I pulled off the internet. This dentist was convicted of fraud and sent to jail for a period of 6 years. When she was released, she was further prosecuted by the Dental Board of Australia and told that she could not register again. So she joined this list of shame, which is the cancelled, disqualified and/or prohibited health practitioners list. So let's have a look at fraud and what some of the health funds say about fraud. HBF, which is a major fund in Australia, defines fraudulent or inappropriate behaviour as the provider or dentist knowingly or recklessly providing information to the fund intended to mislead the fund into paying a level of benefit to the member which they're not otherwise entitled. Misleading information could include receipts or accounts where treatment was not actually provided, incorrect itemisation or incorrect descriptions, incorrect dates of service, incorrect patient name, and a fee for service that didn't appear on the account. If you get this wrong and it is fraud, that's a criminal offence and you may be prosecuted by the police. So what does AHPRA say about this issue? I was fortunate to attend a conference 10 years ago, which was a Private Healthcare Australia Fraud Forum. One of the speakers there was a senior legal officer from AHPRA. AHPRA said this 10 years ago: they only require a reasonable belief that the behaviour in question is professional misconduct. Referral to a tribunal can be made irrespective of any other action that may be taken, including police action, and regardless of whether the practitioner is registered still or not. So if a health fund, and I've seen this happen with some of the dentists that I've helped, if the health funds during an audit identify major issues with your billing and with your practice, they can make a direct referral to AHPRA, which can get you into lots of trouble. Another issue to cover in this topic of appropriate billing in Australia is how to claim your dental treatment for children under the Medicare Child Dental Benefit Schedule, Now, once again, I stress go back to the source document and read it. This is the latest version of the document called the Guide to the Child Dental Benefit Schedule, CDBS. These come out periodically. This is the latest version released on 1 January this year. If you just Google that title, Department of Health Australia Guide to the CDBS or Child Dental Benefit Schedule, this document will pop up as the #1 search on your Google search. Once again, I stress, don't listen to me. I'm just a dentist. You need to go and read this stuff yourself, because if you're going to be billing under the Child Dental Benefit Schedule, what you are effectively doing is you are taking money from the government of Australia. If you're taking money from the government of Australia, you need to be sure you're doing it properly. You want to make sure that you do it correctly in the first place. Otherwise, they have very big sticks that they can hit you with if things don't go well. Another document on the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing website is this one. Once again, if you Google that, CDBS Resources for Dental Service Providers, this gives you a whole range of documents to explain how to claim this treatment for your patients properly. When you take money from the government, because you're a provider under CDBS, you are subject to a whole range of extra obligations, including consent forms, including the records requirements, as I'll cover shortly. This is also searchable on the internet. This is from the Medical Benefit Schedule online. This is a very big slide, so if it's not very clear on your screen. It talks about the current pay rate for that particular item number. So as I said before, when Medicare gets involved in the ADA schedule, they add their own extra 2 digits to the schedule. So it's an 88011 comprehensive oral examination. And the fee for that is $59.60 currently. That goes up most years. So what you need to understand in this area is what are your professional obligations as an Australian qualified dentist if you choose to claim under CDBS, which most of you will. Extra requirements are actually in place, and when you read these documents, you'll find out they use the wording clinically relevant. Now, I've used the wording previously in understanding the ADA schedule. There should be a rationale for the treatment you provided to your patients. In the CDBS Act and the law, they talk about a clinically relevant service. They also say that to claim for a service, the full item number descriptor requirements of that service must have been met. So what does that mean? You need to read the documents really thoroughly to make sure you understand what that means. Clinical records should be sufficiently detailed to demonstrate in the event of an audit by the fund, or by Medicare, that the treatment you provided for that child was clinically relevant to that patient's individual situation. Okay, there's another document you need to read there, It's called the Dental Benefits Rules 2014, and I'll cover that shortly. Section 4 of the Dental Benefits Act, which is a piece of legislation in Australia, talks about a clinically relevant service is one that is generally accepted in the dental profession as being necessary for the appropriate care or treatment of the patient to whom is being rendered. So if the treatment you've given your patient and the work that you've done and the records that you've retained do not meet that criteria, no benefit would be payable. And if it has been paid, because you claimed that item number incorrectly, the government's going to say, pay us the money back, which you have an obligation to do. This is another document that I strongly recommend you read if you're choosing to bill under Medicare CDBS. This is called the Dental Benefits Rules 2014. I got to say, when I searched for this document on the internet, it was a bit of a convoluted pathway to get there, but eventually I got there and this is the subsequent few slides come from that document. These are some slides or some sections from the Dental Benefits Rules 2014, which is available on the internet. What this codifies here is that the Medicare schedule has their own version of the ADA schedule, which means that now it's an 88011 comprehensive oral examination, and it says there what the definition is of the comprehensive oral examination. You also need to understand that this use of this item number is subject to rules 18 and 19. What are they? I'm not going to tell you because you've got to look it up yourself. Rules 18 and 19 are codified in the dental benefits rules. Mainly, they relate to frequency of claiming of that item number and what you are allowed to claim at the same time or in the same period. For example, an 88011, you can claim for a child every 2 years. An 88012, one of the rules is that you can claim that twice per year and no sooner than 5 months. So if you see the child in January, the earliest you can see the child again and bill for an 88012 would be June or July. These are the item codes for dental prophylaxis, 88111, removal of plaque, and 88114, removal of calculus. If you're going to remove calculus on your child patient, I would strongly recommend that you codify in your clinical records which teeth had the calculus on them. It just makes life much easier in the event of an audit. These are the oral surgery extraction numbers, once again the 88, and you can see here an extra one. And this is why I strongly recommend you go back to the source document and read this thoroughly yourself, because 88316 or the item code 316 does not exist in the ADA schedule. What this means is that this is a step-down number for an additional extraction at the same time. And that's subject to a bunch of rules as well. For example, I believe you're allowed to claim 88311 and 2 lots of 88316 on the same date of service. But if you're pulling out 10 teeth, you might find there's a bunch of restrictions to stop you from doing that much work in one day, or they'll stop paying you. So Rule 16, when you read through this document of the dental benefits rules, says that eligible dental providers, that's you, including you need to keep clinical records and the relevant patient consent forms for the provision of all services listed for a period of 4 years. Once again, I stress, read these documents thoroughly, because if you're going to claim under CDBS, you need to understand your professional obligations as far as consent. That's clearly codified in the rules. Appropriate use of these numbers is actually a really critical thing for you to do. If you don't do it correctly, you are likely to be audited by Medicare under the CDBS. Now, I had an interesting bit of data given to me recently by a dentist who I talked to, and I looked at my own practice for the claiming of an item number 022, 88022. So for my child patients, maybe in one full year period, I've taken a number of x-rays for my patients. It's probably a total annual amount of maybe 300. Have a guess what the highest biller in Australia for the same item number was in a Medicare audit, 12,500. You can probably guess that's a heck of a lot of x-rays every day of the year to get to that figure. So when people do that, you get audited. So they collect servicing information or servicing profiles from all transactions you submit electronically to the government. And the government has been slightly more active recently when they're looking at inappropriate claiming. So what is an audit? An audit is a statistical analysis of your claiming of certain item numbers. It's not an analysis or assessment of the quality of the treatment you've provided to your patient. But I've got to say, when you look at audits under Medicare, and that's one of the government roles that I'm involved with currently, you may find if you look at 10 records for a practice, 10 consecutive records, that each of those records is almost identical, which means each child had 8 fish assessments, each child had 3 x-rays, each child had a whole bunch of other treatments done, and there were a lot of numbers claimed every time you saw the patient. Quite often you'll find those treatments didn't actually happen, and you'll find these services were not clinically indicated for that individual child. So then what happens? This is one of the bodies I'm involved with, PSR, Professional Services Review. This is the body that looks at over-servicing of Medicare claims, and this is publicly available information on the PSR website. This is from 4 years ago. Section 92 is where a dentist practitioner has been audited by the government over their overuse of certain item numbers. In this case, it was 88011 checkups, 88111 cleaning, 88121 fluoride treatments, and 88161 fissure sealants. And these were massively in excess of everyone else in Australia. So what was the outcome of this audit? Not all services in the audit were clinically indicated, which means that the dentist rendered a lot of services for cleaning for very, very young patients, where there was nothing indicated on the chart that the patient actually had plaque or stain to be removed. They just automatically billed for a cleaning service. Now, perhaps these dentists did a clean for 2 seconds and thought that was good enough to claim an 88111. Maybe it wasn't. As is often the case in auditing, the practitioner's records were inadequate. For example, the records did not indicate sufficient information or to document the procedures done, such as the technique used in the fissure sealant treatment. Now have a look at that figure. The practitioner agreed to repay to the government $200,000. That's a lot of money, and be disqualified from providing CDBS item numbers for a period of 6 months. Now, when that happens to you by a PSR Section 92 agreement, you also are required under the national law to notify AHPRA and the Dental Board that you've had this judgment made against you. So there will possibly be conditions placed on your AHPRA registration or further regulatory action in addition to having to pay a huge amount of money back to the government. So let's have a look at some of these Medicare audit letters that are sent to dentists. This was an example of one from Western Australia a few years ago. What are they looking for? Well, what they've done is they've looked at a review of the claiming data for this particular dentist and found that they've pretty much only used 88114, which is calculus removal, rather than the lower benefit cleaning item 88111, which is plaque removal or stain removal. And the government believes the dentist has been providing services that don't meet the requirements under the legislation. As I say, if you're taking money off the government, do it very, very well, or they're going to hit you with a big stick. In this case, it was only $8,250 where they asked for repayment to the government, but that can still hurt. Here's another example where the audit process was instigated by the fact that during a period of 1 year, January to December 2020, this dentist claimed more than 5 Medicare item numbers for 113 individual patients. So that included a whole bunch of investigative numbers, X-ray numbers, and treatment numbers such as cleaning. If the dental records didn't match the necessity for those numbers to be provided, the government's going to once again say, pay us the money back, which can be quite painful. Well, that comes to the end of my presentation. I hope I haven't scared you too much about appropriate billing and itemisation of your treatment in Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. That was a very, very juicy presentation. I personally really appreciate it. That was pretty enlightening. And I have to admit that even though I know for many people that are not already practicing or living and working in Australia, this might sound very unfamiliar, but I believe that as a recently successful candidate who not long ago started practicing in Australia, this is something that took me a while to wrap my head around. And as dentists, we learn a lot about teeth. We know lots about medical conditions, medications, and many other things. But then we go through the ADC process. We think we are ready to be thrown into the system. And then we start practicing and we realize that there is so much more to it. And this is a big chunk of it. Yes. I think we don't just need to know about teeth and some conditions like related to the teeth and medical part of the patient, but I don't know, the whole thing starts when we bring the patient in, we do a proper examination, diagnostic, we offer options, get consent, do treatment, and then it's not done. We need to say goodbye to the patient and put something through, and that thing that we put through must be appropriate. That's part of the whole flow. So very, very important. I believe if some people didn't fully get what these item numbers are, probably when you pass your examinations and get to practice in Australia, you will want to come back to this webinar and just rewatch this presentation. It was excellent. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Trini. So
we have a couple of questions. I first want to apologize because I forgot to say that because I don't know, we had this long presentation coming, we weren't going to take a break. So I'm sorry for everyone that were waiting for the break. And also I wanted to remind you, everyone, that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared in the next few weeks. And this will include a list of resources listed by the presenters today, plus some extra references that they thought could be useful for, I don't know, revisit some things for today. So a couple of questions for Martin. The first one is, what should people do when they are asked by the practice owner or supervising dentist to bill something, but they did not think it was appropriate?
That's a great question and something that comes up all the time in practice in Australia, not just for ADC qualified dentists, but for junior dentists in a practice. It's really important to understand your own professional obligations and the responsibility that comes upon you as the practitioner if that bill is put through your provider number, which is the number allocated to you by the government for that particular location of service, that the treatment you bill has to match the records that you write, and you have to be complying with the ethical requirements under your registration. So you've got your own requirements that you have to fulfill. Now, this becomes an ethical issue within your workplace because the boss might tell you to do something that might be inappropriate or in some cases even illegal, and the buck stops with you if something goes wrong. Now, the difficulty, of course, for many of our junior or younger practitioners is you don't know if you're not doing the right thing, if you don't know it's wrong. So you need to understand, first of all, what these numbers are and what the consequences, as I've tried to explain in tonight's lecture, consequences can be for you for doing that incorrectly. So I guess part of this is going to be your own personal fortitude to say, no, that's not appropriate. I don't want to do that because I'm the one that gets billed if the health fund does the audit or if I'm doing the wrong thing. So if you're working in a practice and you're seeing something that would be illegal or really inappropriate, move, go. Don't stay there, because the outcome for you could be quite serious. And if it becomes that you are aware of something that is really dodgy in that practice, you may even have professional obligations to report that practitioner for inappropriate practice. So be aware of that. But I guess the main conversation in the first place would be, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that. If there's an audit, or if I get investigated by AHPRA, that comes back against me, not you. So no, I won't do that.
Thank you so much for that. There's another question. In WA, people with low incomes are subsidized by government and gets 50 to 75% covered. Can we apply or say same things during the exam, or is it different in other states?
There are many states. For example, I work on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. We have the Sunshine Coast Oral Health Service, which provides federal government money to the state government, and the state government don't have enough dentists employed to provide the services, so they farm that money out to private practitioners like myself. In that case, they have a restricted fee schedule where they allow you to do certain treatments. For example, in my local area, one of the vouchers is $260, and they have a fee for service list, which is sometimes 45% less than my fee list. But they say you can do an X-ray, you can do an extraction, you can do a filling, and you can't do much else. So it's a very restricted sort of set of services that can be provided under those schemes. Once again, you've got professional obligations to comply with the rules of those schemes if you're going to take money from the state government. In the case of the person who asked the question from Western Australia, if you're taking Western Australian government money, you need to make sure you comply with the rules of that scheme, which includes using the fee schedule for that scheme, making sure the treatment you provide was clinically necessary, and the event of an investigation that you can back up your choice of treatment and your choice of item code.
Excellent. And I'm reading the question and answer window here. There's so many good comments, good questions, but unfortunately we're short on time. I'm going to remind you again that give me 1 second, the most pertinent questions will be published later when the webinar is put in the ADC website with the answers of whatever questions we didn't have enough time to answer today. I have one personal question, sorry, but
sure, no problem.
The email that you said before, contact@ada.org.au, if we have any comments or questions, is that relevant to the CDBS item numbers as well?
Yes, that could be a question you can ask through the ADA. The contact@ada.org.au is a general contact address for anything to do with ADA. So if you've got an inquiry about appropriate infection control standards in Australia, or an inquiry about HR issues, that number or that email address can be directed to the appropriate people. I don't know specifically that we answer a lot of questions at the ADA about Medicare billing, but there are people within the ADA who'd be able to help you or direct you to the appropriate state branch. So sometimes it's not the federal ADA that will end up being the person that answers your question. It might be directed to the appropriate state branch. For example, New South Wales, they have a huge team of dentists employed within the branch, and a whole lot of people that work in New South Wales who may be able to help you with your inquiries. Where I work in Queensland, we have a team called Assist Team within the branch of ADA, which is able to answer those sort of general practice issue inquiries if you're not sure about using Medicare. To be honest, and no offence to the Medicare people who may be online, they are not particularly helpful. If you ask a general question about how do I do this, you don't seem to get a very detailed and practical answer from the public servants, sadly.
Well, we'll give it a try anyway. Thank you so much again for that excellent, juicy presentation. And we are ready to conclude this webinar. So I would like to remind all participants that the answers of the most common Q&As that have not been addressed in this session will be circulated in the next few weeks. Thank you all presenters. I believe Natalie and Alex had to leave, but thank you to Natalie, Alex, and Martin for your time, for your knowledge and expertise, and for taking the time to share it with us and letting us taking it all in. So we're going to take it home. Hopefully we'll be able to apply it and use it in the best way possible. Thank you so much to all the participants and everyone who joined us today. Thanks for your time and sticking around. I know it's very early in some places and very late in some others. Some of you must be ready to just check out. So thank you, everyone. And lastly, I would like to thank ADC for making this possible and for organizing this excellent, amazing webinar, which is a great opportunity for candidates and people who are going to start practicing in this country. My name is Trini Jacial, and it was an honor for me to host this third edition of the ADC Candidate Forum. So thank you, everyone. Have a very good day or a lovely night. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you.